Cinopes have been on the market for like ages now, but not till recently have they been shrinking in size but increasing in performance. Today we're looking at not only the newest on the market, but a first from Caddx in the GoFilm20. So let's open this up and see if that trend continues. Okay, so here it is, the GoFilm20, the first FPV drone by Caddx. Now this one here is a little bit special because it features their low light 4K camera that can be stabilized both internally or in the GyroFlow software. So let's open this up and see what you get. All right, so the first thing here is a little pouch or container here that has some hardware in here. First thing here is an ND filter, an ND8 filter. That shows that Caddx is really serious about this being a cinematic drone. And this allows you to control the light going into your sensor and giving you some more motion blur as you're filming. Besides that, you also have some propellers on here. You have, looks like 4 propellers on here. Looks like HQ propellers. Next, we have a USB-A to micro USB cable here. And this allows you to connect your flight control to the Betaflight software. Now, typically, most modern flight controls have USB-C on here. So it's kind of interesting to see a micro USB-C connector on this one. But nonetheless, they do provide a cable for you. Besides that, you also have, let's see here, a Allen wrench and a small harness here to update the software or firmware on your VTX. Now, this cable here is very important, and if this is your first, say, Moonlight kit, you do want to keep this in a safe place. This is gonna, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this allows you to update the firmware on your VTX. Next, we have some hardware in here. Looks like some spare bolts for both the frame and for maybe the camera on here. We have a battery strap. Looks like a spare one because we have one here already on the drone, but it has the Caddx FPV logo on there. And finally, you have a quick start guide for the GoFilm20. So pretty comprehensive packaging in here, and they have everything that you would need to get this thing going in the air. So here is your GoFilm20. Really nice drone. A little bit smaller than I expected, but really compact and neat. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the GoFilm20. And first impressions, this thing is neat and tidy, guys. This thing is a really clean drone. Everything from just the design, the canopy, the XT30 connector, even down to the VTX antenna. This thing looks like a premium drone. It just looks like there's no real corners cut here. It was well designed. Everything was considered, even the protection on the camera, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. It just looks like a complete package and a very premium drone. Now, this thing here is very, very light. Let's wait and see how much it weighs. I have my scale right here. All right, and we're looking at around 112 grams, which is a little bit lighter than what Caddx says on the website. Now, this is without the ND filter. It says it should weigh around 115 grams, and with the ND filter, as you can see, 115 grams on the dot. So it is true to what it's saying on the website. Really nice package. Now, that's actually kind of light on here. It's not the lightest drone in this segment, but it's pretty okay. Now, if you add a battery on here, I'm sure this is still gonna come under 250 grams. So if you're worried about registering your drone, this should be pretty good. Now, that's a pretty cool target to meet, only because these smaller drones here, they can deliver 4K images, very smooth, stabilized images. They have all the hardware in here, and to deliver that kind of image sub 250 is pretty impressive. The first thing here are these frames right here. This is a carbon fiber frame, but what's unique about it is that this thing has a nice little black, I won't say paint on here, but a little bit darker than usual carbon or paint on here, but it just gives it a little bit more stealthy look. Typically, most drones, you can just see the carbon fiber weave. They usually use a clear coat to protect the carbon fiber, but this one here looks really nice with this darker finish on here. Now, this thing here is a 3mm thick frame, and that's pretty good compared to some of the competitors in the market. And typically in Cinopes, if you do have a crash, you're not gonna damage or break the frame, but it's pretty reassuring that you do have a little bit thicker than normal frame on this drone. Now, talking about frame, we have these motors that's connected to them, and these are the 1303. These are 6,000 kV motors, and these are Caddx branded motors. I don't know if they're making motors now or who's supplying these, but these look pretty nice, very premium. Hopefully this thing delivers enough torque or thrust to move this thing through the air, especially with a larger battery. Now, connected to them, they have these HQ propellers, but the thing here is that this thing here is durable. This has a T-mount propeller on here, and it looks like this shaft here is around maybe 1.5 millimeters. So this is pretty impressive for this segment because most of the other drones in this segment have like a press-on propeller. So this should be a little bit more durable in crashes. Now, connected to the motors, we have the flight controller and ESC. In this case, we do have an F4 flight controller with 20 amp ESCs, and that's pretty much on par from some of the other competitors in the market. This should do pretty well with this ESC setup in here, and this one here also has Express LS, which we'll talk about here very shortly. Next, we have the star of the show, which is the camera and VTX setup. Now, this is pretty impressive because this is Caddx Moonlight Kit in this drone. Now, that's pretty good because this one here delivers 4K at 60 frames per second, and it can be stabilized both internally, or it does provide gyroscopic information, so you can stabilize it in GyroFlow. Now, this camera here is supposed to deliver smooth cinematic 4K images, and it does that by isolating itself from the drone, so no vibration should go to this camera, and you should have a jello-free or vibration-free image. Now, it does that by mounting the camera on, looks like a TPU mount. As you can see, this thing here all just kind of bends and moves, so it does have some give. It's not hard mounted to the drone, and that should isolate itself from the drone overall. So we'll see how it works. Now, most people will fly in the daytime, but if you do want to fly during sunrise or sunset, you do have the option with this low light camera, and we'll see how it works and see if it delivers pretty good image here on here. Now, the duct on this is pretty cool. It looks like it's very durable, and we'll see if this thing here holds up. But it looks like this whole ducting and frame was designed around the camera. As you can see, there's a ton of protection around this camera here. Starting with the hood here, you have this nice little FPV hood on here. It says Caddx FPV. And that should provide protection, and actually some protection from the sun as well if there's any kind of sun flares on here. But if you have a crash on here, say the drone goes upside down, this is going to protect the camera. In the front here, you have these two TPU mounts in case for a frontal impact. These are pretty impressive, guys, and they thought about this. So this wasn't like an afterthought. It looks like this was designed with the drone. And you have the actual ducting right here, and that sticks out really far and protects for a downward crash, which these drones usually have in the first place. So I don't know, I'm interested to see if any of these ducts or protection is going to show up in the camera, but only time will tell. But so far, it looks like a really great design drone. Besides, the VTX here is pretty impressive. This thing here can have an FCC file, so you can have around 1 watt or 1.2 watts. I think from default, it comes around 700 milliwatts, which is more than adequate in the Walk-Snell system. Now, talking about that, you have these smaller antennas in the back. Now, typically this Moonlight Kit has a larger antenna, but to save on weight, to have a more compact setup here, they have gone with a smaller antenna setup, almost like what you see on the Pavo Pico, and hopefully that doesn't reduce the performance of the VTX setup here. But it's pretty cool that we have two antennas. It is well packaged, really nice. There's no way for this thing to be damaged, but we'll see how this thing here works overall. Now, on the side here, you have a micro SD card slot, so you can record straight to your SD card and bring it to your computer for editing. Now, we talked about this small little harness earlier. Like I said, do not lose it. You have these two slots on here, and these are slots for this harness to update the firmware. Now, this VTX has two boards in here, one for the DVR to record and another for the VTX transmission system. So in order to update this whole VTX, you have to combine the two and do that process with this harness connected to these two slots. So if you do lose this, it's going to be very impossible to update those two boards independently. So make sure you keep a good eye on where you store this harness right here. On the top here, you have the battery strap as well as this mat here for the battery, a little sticky mat. That's pretty cool. As well as a XT30 connector that's actually integrated into the frame. As I said before, this drone here looks very premium only because it looks like everything was thought about in the design. Nothing was left behind. You don't have a cord here dangling. And most modern drones have this integrated plug-in here. So that's pretty cool. There's no way for this thing to be damaged or caught in the propeller. So that's a really nice design by Caddx. Now, this drone here, they recommend a 654S battery. I have a few of those. I'll be testing also some larger and some smaller batteries to see if it gets some longer or some more maneuverability with this drone as well. Now, finally, we have our antenna set up in the back. This is the Express LRS antenna, and it's cool to see an external antenna. Some of the other competitors have a smaller or internal antenna, and those have been delivering some pretty good range. But with this one here, I do suspect to have some really awesome range with this external antenna. We'll see how that goes. I do suspect that you can probably outrange your VTX with this Express LRS setup here. This drone looks pretty impressive, and I'm kind of excited to go fly it, guys. So I'm gonna bind this to my goggles as well as update the passphrase on my Express LRS receiver and go take it for a flight. Okay, so we're back from our flight test, and the GoFilm20 did a pretty good job, guys. So let's jump right into the flight characteristics. Now, this thing took off pretty easy like any other drone, and it does give you that traditional cinewhoop whine. It isn't too loud. It's actually a little bit quieter than your traditional cinewhoop, but it does make that noise. So it's not the really most inconspicuous drone, but it also is not loud either. Now, as far as flight characteristics, this thing flew pretty good, pretty straight like an arrow. No real deviations or wobbles or flight controller freaking out. This thing flew pretty good. Now, today the weather wasn't the most perfect for a cinewhoop, especially one this light. We're talking about winds between 10 and 15 miles an hour. And this thing did a pretty good job considering the winds and some of the turbulence in the air. It performed like it should, like a traditional cinewhoop. Now later on, I did some acro maneuvers with this drone. Now traditionally, cinewhoops aren't designed for acro maneuvers, and just like any other drone, this thing here, it behaved okay, not too bad at all. Doing some power loops, it was pretty good, no real washout or anything. Doing some rolls, it was pretty fine. Now talking about rolls on here, the rates in this drone, it's okay. It's actually pretty decent. It's just that the rates on the roll is a little bit high for my liking. It's not too bad, but for a drone that's designed to capture smooth cinematic images, I wish it was just a little bit lower, a little bit smoother, because just maneuvering the drones around, say, objects, it was just a little bit too twitchy for me. Not a big deal. You can go into beta flight and adjust those rates if you want to, but it still flew pretty well, guys. No issues at all. So overall, the tune and the flight characteristics on this drone here was pretty good. Now, talking about rates and cinematic, let's talk about the visuals of the GoFilm20, and that's arguably the most important part of this drone overall. In other words, can this replace an action camera? Can this thing deliver smooth cinematic 4K images? Is this a better option to the competitors in the market? And overall, guys, I had really good luck with this Moonlight kit. This is a really good setup here, and it matches this drone very, very well. Now, the feed going into my goggles wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty clear, guys. No issues in the standard default settings. I had a clear image, very bright, very saturated, high contrast image going to my goggles. I later on changed those settings for my recording and for my flights later on. So the image that you saw was just a little bit lower on the saturation and lower on the sharpness. Because I live in a bright climate, I also had to change my white balance. Had it fixed instead of auto into 56K since I have just bright lights always here in the state of Florida. But overall, the image going to the goggles was pretty cool. Now you have tons of options to change in there, whether you want 720p or 1080p. Now because I wanted the highest quality going to my DVR, I flew most of my flights in the standard quality. And then on a few flights, I did put it into low latency mode, and it worked as well. But just remember, in the low latency mode, you are limited to 1080p going to the DVR. Now, flying the drone, yes, there is the usual, Caddx or walk snail latency or variable latency. So the further you get, or if you go behind a building or objects, you will see more delay in your transmission and image. That's one thing of the DJI and the Caddx system. There is some latency, and it can change depending on the signal quality and how far you are. But besides that, once you understand that limitation, it was pretty cool. Now, besides that, the image on my DVR was spectacular, guys. So this thing does deliver pretty nice clean image, 4K image, and I was really impressed, guys. This is a viable option or replacement to an action camera, guys. It was really impressive when I saw it on my computer screen. Now with the Moonlight kit, you have two options in stabilizing your footage. In this case, I did try both in the actual VTX as well in the GyroFlow software. Now, as far as the built-in stabilization, it does work. You can see a difference from unstabilized image, but it wasn't that dramatic. There was still some little shakes in there, and I could see a little bit of zooming going on at random times. It wasn't really consistent. I also tried it with the GyroFlow software on my computer right here, and it was significantly better. So most of the footage you saw in the reel here was based on the GyroFlow software. Now talking about that, the gyroscopic information from this is really good, really clean, very accurate, there's no drift, and it was really simple putting it into the GyroFlow software. Once you load your video, it attaches it to the gyroscopic information, the same file, and it's almost like doing nothing. You can just hit render, export, and it's good. It works that well. So I think Caddx has that down pat. It wasn't any tweaking required. Now you can obviously stabilize it even more. You can change the strength. You can change the lens correction, obviously in GyroFlow, but it was pretty simple. You can get really good results with that. So I would highly recommend you use the GyroFlow software to stabilize the image off this moonlight kit. So overall, the GoFilm20 does provide very smooth cinematic 4K images, and it really is a viable option if you don't have an action camera or if you don't want to fly with the competitors on the market. It really is impressive, guys. Okay, so let's move on to the flight times of the GoFilm20. Now, I had really good experience with the flight times on this drone. Now, I averaged between 4 and 6 minutes of flight time. Now, using the recommended 650 milliamp hour battery, I got between 4 and 5 minutes of flight time. Now, using a larger 850 milliamp hour, I was somewhere between 6 and 8 minutes of flight time. Yes, 8 minutes of flight time. Now, this one is a little bit heavier. I also noticed that the motors are a little bit louder when using this battery, only because it's carrying a little bit more weight. But if you don't have to do anything that's aggressive or flies fine, I would actually recommend the 850. It's pretty decent. Now, I also flew with a little bit lighter battery. This is a 525, and I got between 4 minutes and 5 minutes of flight time. So on the lower side here, but this did give me the most maneuverability. It responded very quickly. So it is pretty cool. Now, having said that, if you're gonna use one of these smaller flat style batteries, just be aware of the length of it. Now, this isn't that much longer than the 650. As you can see, it looks very similar in length, but it's just a few millimeters longer. And the reason I bring this up is because these longer batteries have the ability to touch your actual camera canopy right here. They're just a little bit too long, and either it's gonna touch the canopy right here in the front, or it's gonna block your XT60 in the back. It's just slightly long. So I had to mount this a little bit to the side right here. And the main reason here is because you don't want anything to touch your hood here, which is connected to your camera, and give you some false gyroscopic information. So this is the way I've done it, and it can still plug into your XT30 right here. So just get your dimensions right, not a big deal. These standard 850 and 650 fit pretty well actually, and it's the perfect length for this top plate right here. Okay, let's talk about the RX link on the GoFilm20. Now, we have an Express LRS receiver in here with an external antenna, and I got kind of mixed results with this setup right here. Now, my link quality and my RSSI dBm was fluctuating throughout my entire flight test on here. The dBm went down, I was gonna say up to, dBm went down to around maybe minus 110, and they can fluctuate. Now, my link quality did the same thing. Usually it stayed around 100, but sometimes it would go to around 70, 60, sometimes in the 30s, 35, and that's why I was a little bit concerned. Never once did I have a fail-safe though, but it was on my screen. Now, I did also have a warning that was flashing continuously in my OSD. It doesn't show up on my DVR, surprisingly, but it was flashing continuously on my OSD in my goggles. I was flying at around 250 milliwatts, which is to me a little bit on the higher side than normal. I typically fly at 100 milliwatts and get good results. But overall, Express LRS, it is the future. It is Express LRS, it is FPV. This is what you want to use. Very light, low latency, and typically has really good range, guys. All right, lastly, let's talk about the design and durability of the GoFilm20. Now, I think the aesthetics of this drone design is really nice. It's very pretty, it looks very modern with this nice color here and this flat, low profile design. The antennas are very short, and this integrated XT30 into the frame. It looks very modern and clean. Nothing really stands out. It's just a really good design overall. Now, as far as the durability, I did have a few crashes with this drone, maybe 2 crashes in my couple days of testing on here. And on my first crash, I did suffer a cracked prop guard or duct on this drone. I was flying, hit a sign, and I was kind of surprised because the drone kept on flying. It was like almost like a bounce to hit the sign, and then it kept flying. So I wasn't expecting any kind of damage on there. I landed and I saw there was a cracked duct on here. You can see right here, it's a little bit cracked. I have some tape trying to hold it together, but it wasn't so bad. I also had some damage on one of my propellers on here, but I really didn't notice it after I crashed because it still flew pretty great. In fact, I really didn't notice it until I inspected it afterwards, and I have the prop right here. So just a little bit of a nick. So there is a little crack on here. I'm not saying that this thing here is weak, but I was surprised on the first crash that I got a little broken or cracked duct on here. So I suggest that you buy some extra ducts in case you do encounter that for yourself as well. Overall, the design is really nice. I just wish this was just a little bit stronger, maybe just a little bit more malleable. Maybe it can flex a little bit more, but it was a frontal impact. So overall, what do I think about the GoFilm20? Well, I do think that this is a pretty attractive and beautiful drone that delivers on its promise, which is to deliver smooth cinematic 4K video. It does that very, very well. But most importantly, it does prove that it's a viable alternative to the DJI system on the market. This thing has all the same features without any of the downsides of that system. Now, DJI has been on the market for a while, and this thing here delivers adequate image quality and all the features you want in this drone as well. Now, if you're interested in the GoFilm20, I'll leave links down below where you can buy it. That helps the channel at really no cost to you. Now, if you're really interested in getting one of these, but you don't have any of those fancy goggles, well, you're in luck because Caddx does make a VRX for your existing goggles. Now, I've done a full review on this one, and I'll leave it linked right here. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.